In this video, we are going to study the CRUD API output of the CRUD generator. And the reasons why is because we need to understand these parts in order to become capable of modifying it. And we will also modify parts of our HTTP endpoints. Now, if you remember one of our previous video, we downloaded the Northwind database. We installed it locally, and then we used the CRUD generator to wrap it, this database in a CRUD API. This provided us with a bunch of Hyperlambda files, which you can find in HyperID here if you expand Northwind and you have a look at any of the Hyperlambda files down here. Now, the structure of these Hyperlambda files is very easy. Every single table, as long as it has a primary key though, gets a count HTTP endpoint. If we invoke this, it basically returns the count of items. Then it gets a delete HTTP endpoint, which actually deletes one specific entity. If we execute this, you see it's got category ID 1. I'm not going to invoke it because it will probably fail because of like some foreign key or something. Then it provides a get HTTP endpoints, allowing us to get items. And as you can remember from our Angular video, we could do limit, offset, order, direction operator to page, and we could filter. If you remember, we had this string here, %A% that basically returns all items containing the character A, etc., etc. Then it gives us a post HTTP endpoint, which inserts a new category, and now we can actually invoke this. We can call it foobar description. This is its description, and picture can be, we don't need picture. I think it's optional. I'm not entirely sure. Let's check to see. And as you can see now, we have a new category, and the endpoint returns the ID of a new category. And now we can actually invoke the delete endpoint. If you now first invoke the get, then you will see our newly created category here at the bottom, being category ID 9, name foobar, and this is its description and an old picture. And now we can invoke delete and pass in 9 as our category ID to actually delete this category. And that provides us with a Guru meditation, at which point we can go into MISC, open up log in a different browser tab. And as you can see, it was a foreign key constraint for some reasons. I'm too lazy to figure out exactly why at this moment, because now I want to show you the code that Magic produced for us. If you click Alt-M or Option-M on a Mac, you can maximize the code view editor, and you can look at the code in peace and quiet, only focusing on the code. So if we start out with our count endpoint for categories, we maximize it. We look at it, you will see here, we have all the arguments. So we went through this in our Hello World video, our first video, and we illustrated how we can declare an arguments collection. Now, the way this works is that if I try to pass in an argument that I'm not legally allowed to pass in, and in fact, I can try it by clicking F5, then I can copy the invocation URL, open, actually, I need to remove its authentication first. Does it? Yeah, it doesn't have authentication. We removed that part. That's true. So let me open a new browser window, and I can invoke categories count. Actually, it's got access denied. Why does it have access denied? There should be an auth.ticket verify here. Save it. Then F5. Copy the link invocation URL. Open up an incognito window. We're now getting the count. If I now pass in an argument, foo equal blah blah. That doesn't exist in the arguments collection. It's giving me a Guru meditation, come back when the universe is in order. If I now close this guy, Alt-M to demaximize the thing, opening up my log in a different window, you will see the reasons. And the reasons is because I don't know how to handle the foo query parameter. That is because the foo query parameter does not exist in this arguments collection. If we now write foo, type string, say, open up in the new browser window, pass in foo equal blah, blah, blah. All of a sudden, it happily accepts our argument. Now, of course, it returns a bogus count because it adds the foo argument to like the criteria further down here, where it actually retrieves the items. Then you see it has a dot description. This is metadata. You can see it here. Description counts items from your blah, blah, blah. Counts items from your blah, blah, blah. Then it's a type CRUD count. This is useful when we are generating the front end, because the front end will only react upon CRUD count, CRUD read, CRUD delete, etc. However, we probably shouldn't change it from CRUD count because that would make some weird side effects occur as we are generating a front end. Now let's just, to be sure, remove the commenting of line 48 of .ticket.verify, make sure we still have our authentication and authorization requirements on this endpoint. Now, as you can remember from one of our first videos, data.connect connects to a database. Now, however, this one connects in a slightly different way. If you remember the video where we connected to code, a database like this, then you will see that here it's got a slightly different structure. And the reasons why is because we want to have square brackets around the declaration of which database we are actually connecting to. The reasons why is because we want to connect using a specific connection string, and we want to connect to the database Northwind. Now, the relationship of this can be easily viewed if you open up the management, you open up configuration in a different window, and remember that generic parts here. And then we scroll down and we find our databases collection here. And then you see SQLite generic. Generic is the name of our connection string. So this is a connection string. If we had a MySQL connection string here, we could do stuff like this. Call our connection string foo_bar, and then blah, 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 blah. And this would be our MySQL connection string. And in fact, you can actually test it by saving this file. And then go back here, open up SQL Studio in a different window, which point if we choose MySQL here now, you see all of a sudden we have a foo_bar connection string. Now I can't click this because if I do, I'm going to get all sorts of weird errors because it actually tries to connect to a database using this as its connection string, which obviously is not going to succeed. However, you can provide as many connection strings as you want to, as long as they have unique names. You can also do howdy_world. And blah, 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 and save it. And then we can refresh this guy, at which point, if we switch to MySQL now, you will see we now have two connection strings, right? So this is the relationship between the databases connection strings here. And as you can see, it's got MySQL, PGSQL, MSSQL, and SQLite. And this is the connection between the databases declaration in your configuration and this thing. So basically, this uses the generic connection string to use the Northwind database. And for SQLite, this is actually very simple because our SQLite database is just the file, right? I mean, that's how SQLite works. It's just a file-based database processing the data in memory. So if you now remember now here, files/data, then database in these brackets, and then .db. If we now open up tools, HyperID, we turn on show system files, then we will see the data folder contains code, magic, and Northwind. Now, the way the data connect slot works is that it basically replaces these parentheses with the name of the database you want to connect to. So basically, this is substituted dynamically by the data.connect slot here with the name of Northwind, ending up in northwind.db, and that file happens to exist, as you remember, when we went into HyperID and checked out the contents of our data folder. So now you know the internals of how to connect, and then here we can also pass in optionally a database type. We had a MySQL database, we could change it to MySQL. If we had an MSSQL, we could use MSSQL, and we could use PGSQL for Postgres. However, we only have SQLite on this particular cloudlet, so we're just going to have to keep it as it is. So now you know the relationship between data.connect and your connection strings in your configuration parts of Magic. Then you see it's parameterizing our read invocation. If you remember from the video where we did expressions, this means give me my parent node. Okay, the parent node is this node, data.connect. Then find all of its children. Okay, all of its children is like everything here. Then filter away everything whose name is not data.read, meaning we're left with only this guy. and then add the result of these nodes into that. So basically what happens here is that we're ending up with something such as operator here, and then it removes the operator argument, and then it adds into the where collection everything else from arguments, right? So that is basically what is happening here. Then it is invoking data.read. As you can remember from one of our previous YouTube videos, this basically translates into a select SQL statement that is executed towards the currently open database connection of the specific type here, database type SQLite. Here you can see which columns it's returning. It's returning count, giving it an alias, and then it is applying optionally a bunch of where arguments, and it's limiting the result set to one record because, yet again, this is the count endpoint. It only has one result. It's an aggregate result, basically. And then it's returning the result of this invocation. And if you go through all of the CRUD endpoints, they're all similar, right? Here you can see instead of invoking data.read, it's invoking data.delete. Here you can see it's the exact same as the count endpoint, with one difference being that it's not returning an aggregated result, but every single column in our database. And if you modify your database later and you add new columns to it, you can do categories.new column, for instance, at which point all of a sudden it will return the new column. Now, of course, if I invoke this now, it's going to fail because that column doesn't exist on this particular table. So let me just remove it. Post does the exact same thing, more or less, except data.create. Put does the exact same thing, except data.update. Now there's one difference between put, let me rephrase that sentence. The delete endpoint and the put endpoint has one thing in common that none of the other endpoints have. And let's have a look at that further up here. Because you see here, we're using validators .mandatory. Why? Because unless we have a specific category ID on the delete endpoint, the data.delete slot is going to delete everything from our database table. We obviously don't want that to happen. So we have therefore turned the category ID into a mandatory argument, such that when we are invoking data.delete further down here, it's going to end up looking like this. Category ID.eq, blah, 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 etc. And the same with put, right? We don't want to update every single record in our database, so therefore we are turning the category ID argument into a mandatory argument. So have that in mind. Now it's time for an exercise. The first real exercise we're actually throwing in this course. And there will be quite a few of these exercises in the upcoming YouTube videos. However, I wanted you to learn the foundation before I gave you an exercise. Now the exercise is as follows. I want you to ensure that the category name on the post endpoint, find the categories.post.ha, then turn the category name into a mandatory argument, and then make sure that the category name is between 5 and 15 characters in length. Now, obviously, this is going to imply applying a validator to the categories.post.hl endpoint. Piece of advice, click the documentation here, click this hamburger menu, and find magic.lambda.validators here. I'm not going to tell you anything more than this. Why? Because a part of this exercise is actually to learn how to browse the documentation for Hyperlambda. However, once you are done with this, then you can move onwards with the rest of the YouTube videos. Of course, I can't prevent you from doing that anyway, but if you are serious about learning Hyperlambda, this is your first task. And I want you to ensure that you are applying both validators.mandatory and the validators.string such that the characters are between 5 and 15 characters in length. And I want you to do it immediately before you are connecting to the database or inserting any records or doing any of that business logic further down in this Hyperlambda file. So anyways, that was it for today's YouTube video. Please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell, and share the video with your friends. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day.